She's barely cold and you're already measuring my damn walls? I snapped, voice shaking, hand clenched around Margaret's shawl still warm from my jacket pocket. Ellen didn't even blink. She'd want what's best, she said, right as Patricia slipped a folded will addendum into Father Michael's hand. Then he read it, aloud at her memorial, declaring me mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. My wife's voice still echoed in my head. Protect what we built. And now? They'd forged her signature, taken my house, and turned her funeral into a hostile takeover. But they weren't counting on one thing. That priest they bribed? He wasn't the only one watching. My name is Harold Bennett, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning I still set 2 teacups on the kitchen counter out of habit, though Margaret's been gone 3 months now. Our home of 40 years holds her everywhere. My wife, Margaret's piano in the parlor, her roses beneath the kitchen window, her precise bookkeeping ledgers in the study desk. We built this life methodically, she as a schoolteacher, and I as an army clerk turned accountant. Margaret's family, especially her cousin Ellen and brother Robert, always tensed when money came up at holiday dinners. My fingers would tighten around my fork, but Margaret would squeeze my knee under the table. Protect what we built, she'd whisper, showing me her careful records each night. The house feels too quiet now, but I maintain our routines. Her silver letter opener still marks each day's mail. But let me start from the beginning. The morning of Margaret's memorial dawned slate grey and heavy, like the weight in my chest. I stood at our bedroom mirror, adjusting my tie for the 10th time, when my hand brushed against her shawl draped over the chair. The soft, cream wool still held traces of her lavender powder. Before I could stop myself, I'd folded it carefully and tucked it into my jacket pocket. You know that feeling when you're walking into a room full of people who are waiting to see you break. That's what hit me as I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of St. Brigid's Parish Hall. The whispers started before I'd taken 3 steps. Margaret's cousin Ellen's voice carried clearly, already lost. Without her. My fingers tightened around the memorial program I'd helped design, with Margaret's favorite psalm on the cover. Her sister Patricia materialized at my elbow, all pearls and practiced sympathy. "Harold," she said, stretching her lips in what might have passed for a smile if you didn't notice her eyes staying cold as winter glass. "We've saved you a seat up front." I nodded, not trusting my voice just then. The memorial table drew me like a magnet. Margaret's photo, the one from our 40th anniversary, showed her laughing in the garden, secateurs in hand, and a yellow rose tucked behind her ear. The ivory lilies surrounding the frame were wrong. She'd always preferred simple daisies. But I hadn't been consulted about the flowers. The guest book lay open, its pages filling with shaky signatures and carefully worded condolences. I watched Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down, struggle to keep her pen steady as she wrote. Something about those trembling letters made my throat tight. "Protect what we built," I whispered under my breath, Margaret's words steadying me like they always had. I reached for her shawl in my pocket, letting the soft wool ground me. Father Michael cleared his throat at the podium, and the murmuring crowd began settling into their seats. I couldn't help noticing how Margaret's family had arranged themselves in the front row, Ellen, Patricia, and Robert forming a tight cluster, as if they owned the center aisle. Their designer clothes and practiced poses seemed more suited to a corporate merger than a memorial. I'd prepared simple words about Margaret, nothing fancy, just the truth about how we met at the county fair in '69, her cotton candy getting stuck in her hair as the summer wind whipped around us, about the garden we'd started with, 3 rose bushes and built into something that made passing neighbors slow their cars to look, about 52 years of quiet evenings and shared crossword puzzles, and her terrible attempts at making meatloaf. But before anyone could speak, Father Michael adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat again. "Before we begin sharing our memories of Margaret," he said, "I've been asked to announce that following the eulogies, there will be a reading of a recently discovered legal addendum to Margaret's will." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Addendum. Margaret and I had done our will together just last year, everything clear and settled. I looked up sharply, catching the quick glances shooting between Ellen, Patricia, and Robert. There was something hungry in their eyes, something that made my stomach twist into knots. From the corner of my eye, I saw Robert's hand slip into his, suit jacket, probably touching whatever papers they'd cooked up. The parish hall suddenly felt too warm, too close. Margaret's shawl burned in my pocket like an accusation. The program crumpled slightly in my grip as Father Michael gestured for the first speaker to approach the podium. I forced my breathing to steady, the way Margaret had taught me during my panic attacks after Vietnam. In, hold, out. But all I could think was, what have they done? Ellen leaned over to whisper something to Patricia, both of them casting sidelong looks my way. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it 3 pews back. This wasn't just grief anymore. This was something else entirely. Something with teeth. Father Michael cleared his throat again, unfolding a crisp sheet of paper. Ever notice how bad news always comes on pristine paper? This addendum, he began, his voice echoing off the parish walls, dated 3 weeks ago, concerns the Bennett estate and Margaret's final wishes regarding its management. My mouth went dry. 3 weeks ago. Margaret could barely hold a pen by then. In consideration of recent health challenges and their impact on household decisions, Father Michael read, I hereby transfer control of all property and financial matters to my family members, Ellen Morris, Patricia Whitman, and Robert Collins, until such time as my husband Harold is deemed mentally competent to manage affairs independently. The words hit like ice water. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson's hand flew to her mouth, and Tom from the garden club actually stood up before his wife tugged him back down. It's for the best, Ellen stage whispered to the woman next to her. Poor man's been lost since the diagnosis. My pulse hammered in my ears as Father Michael turned the page around, showing Margaret's signature at the bottom. But something was wrong. I'd seen Margaret's handwriting every day for 52 years, in grocery lists, birthday cards, her beloved ledgers. Her penmanship had always danced across the page, looping G's and flowing F's like musical notes. This signature was stiff, hesitant, like someone trying too hard to copy her style. Just 2 months ago, Margaret had sat at our kitchen table, back straight despite the pain, and gone over every detail of our affairs. We decide things together, Harold, she'd said, tapping her favorite blue pen against the bills. That's how we've always done it, and that's how it stays. Promise me you'll keep your dignity no matter what. The language in this addendum wasn't Margaret. Deemed mentally competent? My wife was a school teacher who graded papers in red ink and complained about legal jargon. She wouldn't have written like a corporate lawyer. I was supposed to speak next, my little story about the county fair cotton candy all prepared. But standing at the lectern, the words died in my throat. Across the front row, Patricia's lips curled in a smile that reminded me of sharks I'd seen on nature shows. Robert kept checking his watch, like my grief was running on his schedule. You know that feeling when your mind's screaming but your body's frozen? That's where I was, staring at my note cards while the congregation shifted in their seats. The story about Margaret's yellow roses and our first garden trellis felt meaningless now, with that forged paper sitting on the podium like a landmine. Father Michael wouldn't meet my eyes as he folded the addendum away. I'd known him for 20 years. He'd had dinner at our table, blessed our garden. But today, he was looking everywhere else. The stained glass windows, the memorial flowers, the ceiling beams, anywhere but at me. The rest of the service passed in a blur. People filed past with mumbled condolences that sounded more like business transactions than comfort. So sorry for your loss became, I'm sure they'll take good care of things and changes can be for the best. I was struggling into my coat when they surrounded me, Ellen, Patricia, and Robert, forming a tight circle by the rack. The smell of Patricia's expensive perfume made my head spin. We'll start transitioning things tomorrow, Robert announced, checking his phone. The upstairs guest room will need clearing out first. I'm thinking of using it as a home office, Ellen added. Better use of the space. Patricia patted my arm with her manicured hand. We'll help you sort through Margaret's things, of course, decide what's important to keep. That guest room still had Margaret's sewing machine by the window, where she'd sit in the afternoon light working on her quilts. Last Christmas, she'd made tiny stockings there for the children's hospital. I stood there, my coat half on, while they divided up my home like I was already gone. The memorial program crumpled in my pocket, Margaret's psalm folding in on itself. The drive home felt like wading through fog. I kept seeing that fake signature swimming in front of my eyes, hearing Ellen's smug whisper echo in my ears. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across our front walkway as I fumbled with my house key. My hands were shaking so bad, it took 3 tries to get the door open. I hadn't even hung up my coat when I heard it, the soft scrape of furniture being moved in the living room. My stomach dropped. They'd beaten me home somehow. "Oh, good. You're back," Margaret's sister Ellen called out, not even looking up from where she stood with a measuring tape stretched across our main wall. "I'm thinking the Cunningham portrait will look perfect right here. It's been in the family for generations, after all." The Cunningham portrait, the one Margaret had specifically refused to hang because old Uncle George had been, in her words, a mean-spirited bully who made Christmas miserable. Now Ellen wanted to stick his sourpuss face where our wedding photo had hung for 40 years. 12 feet even, Ellen announced to Patricia, who was scribbling in a little notebook. "We'll need to patch these holes first, of course. Harold's been a bit haphazard with his decorating." Those haphazard holes marked 5 decades of carefully placed photos: our first house, our garden winning the county fair, Margaret getting her teaching award, each one measured and leveled with my father's old spirit level. I had to get to Margaret's desk, had to check those papers before they started organizing in there too. "Excuse me," I muttered, sliding past them toward the study. My chest felt tight, like someone was squeezing it in a vice. "Oh, we'll need to go through the study soon," Patricia called after me. "So many papers to sort." The study door closed behind me like a shield. I sank into Margaret's chair, still adjusted to her height, and pulled out my key ring. Second key from the end, small brass one she'd given me 30 years ago. "Keep this safe," she'd said. "Everything important lives in that drawer." The ledger drawer unlocked with a familiar click. Margaret had been meticulous about paperwork, came from 20 years of teaching high school accounting. Every document was labeled, dated, and filed in crisp manila folders. My hands were steadier now as I laid out the important ones. Our original will copies, witnessed and notarized 5 years ago. Margaret's letters to our lawyer about estate planning, each one bearing her true signature, flowing and graceful, nothing like that stiff forgery. Bank statements showing joint accounts, property deeds with both our names. From the kitchen came the murmur of voices. Storage unit on Madison Street. Closet space in the guest room? What to do with all these gardening books? I reached for the phone, dialed James Murphy's number from memory. He'd been our lawyer since before Margaret got sick, had dinner with us every Christmas Eve. "Harold?" His voice was concerned. "I was going to call you about that addendum." "It's not her signature, James." My voice came out hoarse. "I need you to look at these papers, the real ones. First thing tomorrow morning," he said firmly. 8 a.m. sharp. Don't let anyone remove anything from the house until then. Try to stay calm. Calm. Right. Like when you're watching burglars case your house through the windows. I gathered everything into my old briefcase, the one Margaret had given me when I retired. As I slipped the memorial program inside, something fell out. A business card. Father Michael's, with an odd handwritten note on the back. Consultation. Fee received $2,000. Since when did priests charge consultation fees for memorials? The evening crept by like cold molasses. I stayed in the study, watching through the crack in the door as my in-laws roamed the house like real estate agents at an open house. They measured rooms, opened closets, whispered about market value and necessary renovations. Every time they passed the study door, my hand tightened on the briefcase handle. Inside were 52 years of careful records, proof of every decision Margaret and I had made together. Every dollar saved, every property maintained, every investment grown. The house finally went quiet around midnight. I heard car doors slam, engines start. Through the study window, I watched taillights disappear down our street. Dawn wasn't far off. I'd be at James Murphy's office the moment it opened. These documents spread across his desk like a battle plan. Margaret's real signature would tell its own story. I touched the wedding ring on my finger, the one that matched hers, now buried with her. "I'm protecting what we built, love," I whispered. "Just like you asked." 8 o'clock sharp, and I was already in James Murphy's waiting room, briefcase on my lap. Ever notice how law offices always smell like furniture polish and anxiety? The receptionist kept glancing my way, probably, wondering why an old man was clutching his briefcase like it held the crown jewels. "Harold, come on in." James looked exactly as he had at our Christmas dinners, round glasses, grey moustache trimmed just so. but his usual warm smile was missing. I spread out our documents across his desk, the original will, Margaret's letters, our property deeds. My hands shook a little, but I walked him through each one, pointing out Margaret's authentic signatures. See here. I tapped the flowing script on her last Christmas card to me. That's how she really wrote, not those chicken scratches on that addendum. James picked up his reading glasses, studying the memorial addendum against Margaret's genuine signatures. His frown deepened with each comparison. The seals look proper, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Standard legal font, correct formatting. He sighed, setting down his glasses. Harold, I hate to say this, but the addendum appears official enough to stand up in court, unless we can definitively prove it's forged. My throat went dry. But you can see it's not her signature. Signatures can vary, especially when someone's ill. He shuffled through some papers on his desk. And there's another problem. The family's retained Carlton and Associates. The name meant nothing to me. Top-tier estate lawyers, James explained. They've already filed a notice of control with the county. They're moving fast. Remember how your stomach dropped on those old roller coasters at the county fair? The ones Margaret would never ride. That's how I felt right then. James pulled out a calculator. Let's look at your resources. Monthly pension. I told him the number. Savings? I gave him that figure too. He punched in some numbers, his lips moving silently. With Carlton's hourly rates, he set the calculator down. Harold, I think we need to discuss tempered expectations. You know that moment when you realize you've brought a pocket knife to a gunfight? That's what it felt like, sitting there watching James do his sums. The drive home felt longer than usual. The autumn sun was already low, casting long shadows across our front yard. Margaret's roses needed deadheading. She'd never let them go this long, without attention. Inside, the house felt different, wrong. The first thing I noticed was our mantel. Every framed photo laid face down, like they were playing dead. Our wedding photo, the one of us at the Grand Canyon, Margaret with her first class of students, all of them hidden away. A wheeled suitcase stood by our bedroom door. H. Bennett Guest Room, read the label in Patricia's precise handwriting. When had they even found time to buy? Luggage tags. Oh good, you're back. Patricia emerged from the kitchen, all business-like efficiency. We've been organizing things for the transition, for your safety, really. My safety? The word came out sharp enough to cut. Now Harold, Margaret's brother Tom, stepped in, using that tone people reserve for difficult children. We're all concerned about your competency to manage alone. The addendum just makes official what Margaret clearly wanted. Margaret would never... I started, but my voice cracked. She was worried about you, Patricia cut in smoothly. We all are. These big old houses, all those stairs. It's really for the best. I looked at their faces. Concerned expressions that didn't reach their eyes. Thought about their expensive lawyers versus my modest pension. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a foolish old man who couldn't see his own limitations. The bedroom door felt heavy as I closed it behind me. I sat on the edge of our bed, still made with Margaret's hospital corners. The mattress dipped where she used to sleep, and I pressed my hand against that empty space. Footsteps paused outside the door. Whispers drifted through. Give him time to adjust. I'd never felt more alone in our house than I did right then, surrounded by people who claimed to be family. The morning crept in through our bedroom curtains, the ones Margaret had picked out last spring, with those tiny yellow flowers she loved. My mouth felt like sandpaper, and her words from yesterday echoed in my head. Protect what we built. You ever notice how a house feels different when unwanted guests are sleeping under your roof? Every creak, every shadow seems to watch you. I shuffled to the kitchen in my slippers, hoping to grab some coffee before the others woke up. Margaret and I used to share that first quiet cup, just watching the birds at our feeder. But when I reached for the coffee filters, they weren't in their usual spot. None of the cabinets held what they should. Someone had been organizing. Great, I muttered, opening and closing doors until I finally found them stuffed behind the soup bowls. Who puts coffee filters there? While the coffee maker gurgled, something on. The fridge caught my eye. A sheet of paper taped crookedly. House access schedule. They'd divided up my home like a timeshare, complete with designated supervision hours. My hands shook as I poured my coffee, splashing hot drops onto the counter where Margaret used to set out our morning vitamins. I needed help, real help, so I called James again, catching him before his first appointment. "James," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "there must be something we can use to fight this. Margaret kept everything, letters, notes, cards." He perked up at that. "Contemporaneous writings could help. Anything showing her true intentions, especially from when she was drafting the original will. Personal correspondence, diary entries. She kept ledgers," I cut in, "boxes of them, everything dated and organized." "That's actually perfect." I could hear papers shuffling on his end. "Start there. Look for patterns, inconsistencies with the addendum. Anything that doesn't match her usual style." I didn't wait to finish my coffee. In our study, Margaret's ledger boxes sat exactly where they'd always been, untouched by the reorganization happening elsewhere. The familiar scent of paper dust and dried lavender, she tucked sachets in every box, hit me as I lifted the first lid. Ever seen how a bookkeeper from the old school does things? Margaret was meticulous. Every envelope marked with the date received, every letter coded to match its response, every bank statement reconciled to the penny. I started laying them out by month, and you know what? A pattern emerged, clear as day. Margaret's real signatures had this distinctive flow. The M always started high, and she'd finish each letter with a slight upward curve. 52 years of marriage, you notice these things. But, more than that, she cross-referenced everything. A note about a charity donation would have the receipt paper-clipped right there, dates matching perfectly. I pulled out that photocopied addendum again, really studying it this time. The more I looked, the more wrong it felt. Margaret never used semicolons, said they were pretentious, but here was one in the first paragraph. She wrote "shall" instead of "will," because, she'd tell me, "shall" sounds like you're ordering someone around. But this addendum was full of shalls. Then there was the signature itself. Even in the photocopy, you could see something was off. Real signatures have pressure points where the pen slows or speeds up. This one looked printed. Too perfect. Like someone had traced it. I grabbed a legal pad and started making notes. Times, dates, patterns. The morning slipped away as I built my case, one detail at a time, just like Margaret taught me when we'd balance our books together. The grandfather clock in the hall, Margaret's wedding gift from her parents, chimed noon, just as I heard more boxes being dragged in through the front door. Patricia's voice carried down the hallway, something about family photos and proper sorting. I was halfway through the first binder when the doorbell rang. Know what's funny? For the first time since the memorial, I felt something besides grief, something like hope. Because Margaret hadn't just left me a house full of memories, she'd left me a paper trail. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. When I opened it, there stood Father Thomas, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. I hadn't seen him since Margaret's brother's funeral 4 years back, but those kind eyes hadn't changed a bit. "Harold," he said, clutching a worn leather folio to his chest. "May I come in?" I glanced over my shoulder, hearing Patricia's voice drift from the kitchen. "Of course, Father, though I should warn you, the house isn't quite your own at the moment." He raised an eyebrow, stepping inside. "That's partly why I'm here. Mind if we sit somewhere quiet? You know how sometimes just having someone else acknowledge what you're going through makes it feel more manageable? That's what hit me right then." "The study," I said. "It's the one room they haven't reorganized yet." Once we were settled, him in Margaret's reading chair, me at her desk, he leaned forward. "I heard some troubling things after the memorial service, about an addendum to Margaret's will." His tone was gentle but focused. "Would you tell me what's happened?" So I did. Every bit of it. The whispers at the service, that forged document, how they'd started dividing up my home like I wasn't even there. My voice cracked once or twice, but Father Thomas just waited, nodding. When I finished, he opened his folio and pulled out a legal pad. "I should mention, before taking my vows, I practiced law for 12 years. Estate planning, mostly." He smiled slightly. "The Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he?" "That he does, Father." "Now then," he said, uncapping a pen, "I need to see everything. Every document, every letter, all in chronological order, please. Can you do that for me?" Something about his precise, methodical approach steadied my breathing. Here was someone who knew how to handle this properly. "I've already started sorting them," I said, gesturing to the boxes. "Margaret kept impeccable records." "Excellent." He stood, rolling up his sleeves. "Let's move to the dining room table. We'll need the space." I hesitated. "Patricia and the others are—" "Let them hear us working," he said firmly. "We're doing nothing wrong." For the next hour, we spread papers across the table's oak surface. Father Thomas worked like a surgeon, marking suspicious items with little colored flags. Remember those old library catalogue cards? That's how precise he was, noting every detail. "Harold," he said eventually, "I need copies of some specific items. The death certificate first, then Margaret's original will, all pages. That photocopied addendum, of course, and—" He paused, tapping his pen. "Any notes from the memorial service, especially about who was present and who handled the documents." "I can get those," I said, already moving toward the study. Those files were right where I'd left them, tucked safely in Margaret's bottom drawer. When I returned, Father Thomas had put a kettle on. "Hope you don't mind," he said. "This kind of work goes better with tea." "Margaret would approve," I replied, managing a small smile. She'd always said tea was civilization's best invention. We worked until the late afternoon sun started striping the table with long shadows. Father Thomas made neat stacks of the most important papers, securing each with brass clips. "I'll need to review these properly," he said, checking his watch. "Would tomorrow afternoon work for you? Say around 2? I nodded, feeling steadier than I had in days. "Thank you, Father. I can't tell you what this means." "No thanks needed." He gathered his things carefully. "Just keep everything exactly as it is. Don't discuss this with anyone else yet. And Harold?" He paused at the study door. "Stay strong. Margaret chose well when she married you." I started gathering the scattered envelopes as the sun slid across the wood grain, turning the old table to honey gold. For the first time since the memorial, I felt like I was doing more than just enduring. The next morning I was up before dawn. You know that kind of focus that comes when you finally see a path forward? That's what Father Thomas had given me. I pulled out every ledger Margaret had kept over the last 5 years, setting them on her desk in neat chronological stacks. Have you ever noticed how someone's real habits show up in the smallest details? Margaret's system was like clockwork. Bank statements paperclipped to corresponding checks, utility bills marked with payment dates, everything cross-referenced in her flowing script. The familiar sight of her handwriting made my throat tight for a moment. I started building an index on a legal pad, the way I used to back in my army clerk days. Date, signature, bank reference, line after line of proof that Margaret handled our affairs with clockwork precision. Her final signature, dated just 2 weeks before she passed, was as steady as ever. I remembered how she'd insisted on signing those last checks herself, propped up in her hospital bed. "Need to keep the books straight," she'd said, with that determined look I'd loved for 52 years. Around 10, Patricia's voice carried through the cracked study door. "Harold, we're reorganizing the kitchen cabinets. So much easier to reach everything when it's properly arranged." I kept my eyes on the ledger. "I'm occupied at the moment." "You know," she pressed on, "downsizing can be very healthy at our age, less to worry about." The scratch of my pen grew louder. "Thank you, but I'm quite comfortable with things as they are." She lingered in the hallway another moment before her footsteps retreated. I double-checked the death certificate copies I'd set aside, then turned to the memorial service program. Something about its layout nagged at me. The font seemed different from our usual church bulletins. At exactly 2 o'clock, Father Thomas's knock echoed through the house. I heard him exchange polite but brief greetings with Margaret's sister in the living room before making his way to the study. He carried a leather case today, setting it carefully on the desk. "Good afternoon, Harold. I see you've been busy." I gestured to my morning's work. "Everything's sorted by date. Margaret's originals here, copies here, and I found a few anomalies in the service program." "Excellent." He unzipped his case, removing what looked like a jeweler's loop and a thick book with dozens of colored tabs. "Let's start with that addendum." For the next hour, Father Thomas worked like a forensic scientist. He traced each letter with a practiced eye, measuring margins with a tiny metal ruler that gleamed in the afternoon light. Every now and then he'd consult his book, Standard Legal Statutes, the spine read, and make careful notes. "Harold," he said finally, "would you read something for me?" He pointed to the date line on the addendum. "Just this part here." I leaned forward, adjusting my reading glasses. "This 15th day of October, 2000 and—" My voice caught as the numbers suddenly registered. Father Thomas's finger rested steadily beneath the date. 3 weeks after Margaret's death, according to this certificate. He tapped the official document we'd laid alongside it. "You can't amend a will after you've passed away." The room went absolutely still. You could have heard a pin drop across carpet. "This," Father Thomas said quietly, "is your fulcrum. The point where everything turns." Just then, the front door's latch clicked shut, leaving us in perfect silence. I stared at those impossible dates, proof as clear as sunlight that they'd tried to steal not just my home, but Margaret's very last wishes. Remember how I mentioned feeling focused earlier? That was nothing compared to the crystalline clarity that swept through me now. Margaret's voice echoed in my mind. "Protect what we built." Well, my love, I thought, now we know exactly how. Father Thomas and I moved to the dining room table, where the evening light made long shadows across our growing pile of evidence. Have you ever noticed how a good plan can make even your hands steady? Mine were finally, as I arranged the documents in presentation order. "First things first," Father Thomas said, pulling out his phone. "We need photos of everything, front and back, with clear shots of those dates." He showed me how to hold a ruler beside each document for scale. Court likes precision. I remembered my old army clerk days, tracking supply manifests. "Should we number these, create an exhibit log?" "Exactly right." He smiled, sliding me a legal pad. "Note down when and where you first saw each document. Chain of custody matters." The familiar rhythm of careful record-keeping settled over me, the scratch of my pen mixed with the soft click of his camera. Outside, a neighbor's wind chimes tinkled. The ones Margaret had always said sounded like summer memories. "Now," Father Thomas said, "we need your affidavit. Tell me everything you remember about the memorial service. Who stood where, what was said, how that addendum appeared." I closed my eyes, letting the scene replay. The priest wouldn't look at me when he read it, kept his eyes down like he was ashamed. "Good detail. Write that down." Father Thomas guided me through each memory, helping me distill them into clear, simple statements. "Short sentences, Harold, just the facts." He drafted his brief while I worked, pausing occasionally to ask questions. "Did Margaret ever mention changing her will during her final months?" "No. She was clear-headed until the end. Said everything was set just as she wanted." Around 7, a sharp knock interrupted us. Patricia's voice carried through the door. "Harold, we need to discuss bedroom arrangements. Mother's antique vanity arrives tomorrow." I glanced at Father Thomas, who nodded encouragingly. My voice came out stronger than I expected. "Any changes to the household should go through legal counsel. I'll have my attorney contact yours." "This is ridiculous," Margaret's sister Janet chimed in. "We're family." "Then family can speak through family lawyers," I replied, turning back to my affidavit. Their footsteps retreated, and Father Thomas gave me an approving nod. "Perfect tone. Now, let's practice your testimony. Keep your answers short and direct." We spent the next hour rehearsing. He'd ask a question, I'd start rambling, and he'd guide me back to simple statements. "Just like your affidavit," he reminded me. "One clear fact at a time." By 9, we had a trial folder packed, original documents, photographs, my affidavit, and his brief challenging the addendum. My hands shook slightly as I clipped it shut, but my spine felt straighter than it had in weeks. "I'll file this first thing tomorrow," Father Thomas said, securing the folder in his briefcase. "Meet me outside courthouse security at 8. Wear something professional but comfortable." After he left, I went upstairs and laid out my charcoal suit, the one Margaret said brought out my eyes. I added the blue tie she'd given me for our 50th anniversary. "You look distinguished in blue," she'd said, smoothing it against my chest. The hall light switch clicked off under my hand, leaving me in the familiar darkness. In our bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over Margaret's pillow. That impossible date on the addendum kept floating through my mind. If a single line could tell such a clear truth, what other truths might be waiting to speak? The next morning dawned with that particular kind of September clarity that makes everything look freshly polished. I met Father Thomas on the courthouse steps at 8 sharp, both of us squinting in the morning sun. Have you ever noticed how official buildings seem to grow taller when you're about to do something important inside them? Ready? Father Thomas asked, adjusting his collar. He had that calm certainty I remembered from watching him lead services years ago. As I'll ever be, I said, gripping the leather folder that held our evidence. My new blue tie felt a bit tight, but Margaret's voice in my head reminded me to stand straight. The security line moved quickly. Metal detector, bag check, directions to the clerk's office. The marble floors echoed with purposeful footsteps and whispered conversations. I caught my reflection in a brass directory plate, silver hair combed neat, shoulders back, chin up. Looking like someone who belonged here, someone who had truth on his side. Filing counters this way, Father Thomas said, steering us through a maze of hallways. The clerk took our motion with practiced efficiency, stamp, 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 then handed back our copies. Judge Morrison's reviewing new filings this morning. Check the posting board after 10. We found a wooden bench near the posting board and waited. I pulled out Margaret's old pocket watch, the one she'd inherited from her father, and clicked it open. 9:47. Harold? Father Thomas's voice dropped low. Your in-laws just walked in. I didn't turn around, but I heard Patricia's distinctive click-click heels and what had to be their attorney's confident stride. The kind of walk that costs $300 an hour. At 10:15, a court officer pinned up the day's schedule. Father Thomas went to check while I held our spot. He came, back with a slight smile. Judge Morrison wants us all at 2, full hearing. Today? My stomach did a quick flip. Best news we could get. No time for them to cook up explanations for that date. We claimed a small conference room for lunch, spreading our documents across the table. Father Thomas had brought white cotton gloves for handling the originals. Shows respect for evidence, he explained. Judges notice details like that. He ran me through the testimony again, tightening my answers until they were clear as cut crystal. Remember, he said, just the facts. Let the documents do the heavy lifting. At 1:55, we entered courtroom 3. Dark wood panels climbed the walls, and the afternoon sun slanted through tall windows. The in-laws and their attorney already occupied the front row. Patricia shot me a look that could have frozen coffee. All rise, the bailiff called as Judge Morrison entered, a tall woman with steel-grey hair and alert eyes. Be seated, she said, opening a folder. Regarding the Bennett estate challenge, she looked up at the gallery. I've reviewed this morning's filings. Concerning timing, Your Honor. The in-law's attorney stood, straightening his silk tie. We object to this 11th-hour challenge of a properly executed addendum. Judge Morrison's gaze could have drilled through steel. Counsel, I'm aware of your position. However, given the nature of the alleged discrepancy, she nodded to her clerk. Please display Exhibit A. The familiar page appeared on monitors throughout the courtroom, magnified so every detail stood clear. My hands gripped the gallery rail as the date swam into focus, 3 weeks after we'd laid Margaret to rest. The room seemed to shrink, all attention drawn to those impossible numbers, glowing on the screens. I heard Patricia shift in her seat, and even their expensive attorney's posture stiffened slightly. Given the significance of this temporal anomaly, Judge Morrison continued, I'm prepared to hear direct testimony. Father Thomas, are your witnesses ready? Yes, Your Honor. Father Thomas stood, calm as Sunday morning. We've prepared both documentary and testimonial evidence regarding the addendum's authenticity. Very well, Judge Morrison made a note. Mr. Bennett, please approach the witness stand. Let's begin with your direct knowledge of the original will and your late wife's intentions. I stood, straightening my tie, Margaret's tie, and walked forward. The wood-paneled walls seemed to lean in, listening. I gripped the edge of the witness box as their attorney rose, all polished confidence and practiced gestures. Your Honor, this is clearly a simple, clerical error. He waved a manicured hand. The date confusion likely stems from standard document processing delays. Judge Morrison's pen tapped her notepad. Counsel, are you suggesting hospital discharge papers and a death certificate were incorrectly dated? No, Your Honor. I'm suggesting the addendum's date is a typographical oversight. My shoulders tensed. That smooth voice could probably sell sand in a desert. But Father Thomas stood, calm as still water. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to establish a clear timeline. The judge nodded. Proceed. Father Thomas approached with 3 documents in his gloved hands. Exhibit B, the death certificate. Exhibit C, hospital discharge summary. and Exhibit D, the printed obituary. He placed each one under the document camera. The dates marched across the screens in crisp black ink. Margaret's last day at the hospital, the death certificate's official stamp, the newspaper's morning edition, all weeks before that impossible addendum date. The record shows a consistent sequence, Father Thomas said. Now, regarding the addendum's introduction, he turned toward the gallery. Father Michael, please approach the witness stand. The officiating priest from the memorial, the one who'd read that forged page, rose slowly. I remembered his business card tucked under the program and felt my pulse quicken. After he was sworn in, Father Michael perched at the edge of the witness chair like it might bite. His collar seemed too tight. Father Michael, Father Thomas began, please tell the court how you came to possess the addendum. I received it through the family. Could you be more specific? Father Michael's fingers twisted in his lap. There was a meeting, just before the memorial service. The gallery stirred. Judge Morrison's pen stopped moving. And who attended this meeting? Mrs. Bennett's sister Patricia, her cousin Robert, and... Father Michael swallowed. Their attorney. I watched Patricia's face go rigid. Her expensive lawyer shifted papers, suddenly very interested in his notes. Was Mr. Bennett present at this meeting? No. Was there any discussion about the addendum's origin? Father Michael's voice dropped. They said it had been properly executed, that it was important to read it at the service. Important to whom? Objection. Their attorney shot to his feet. Calls for speculation. Sustained. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Father Michael, did you verify the document's authenticity? I assumed it was legitimate, given the parties involved. Father Thomas held up another paper. Your Honor, I have here phone records showing multiple calls between Father Michael's number and Patricia Bennett's cell phone in the week before the memorial. I'd like to enter these as Exhibit E. Patricia's face went from rigid to stone. Robert suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Judge Morrison studied the new records, then checked her watch. We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we resume, Father Michael will provide a complete account of all communications regarding this addendum. She fixed the gallery with a steady look. I suggest all parties use this time to consider their positions carefully. The gavel crack echoed off the paneled walls. Father Thomas touched my shoulder as I left the witness box. You did well, he said quietly. Sometimes justice just needs a clear path to walk. I watched Father Michael hurry toward the water fountain, his hands shaking slightly. Patricia and Robert huddled with their attorney in a corner, voices urgent and low. The smooth confidence had evaporated like morning dew. In the hallway, I pulled out Margaret's pocket watch again. The soft tick-tick-tick steadied my breathing. 15 minutes. 15 minutes before the whole house of cards would finish falling. Remember what you taught me about patience, love, I thought. Sometimes you have to let truth find its own time to bloom. When Father Michael returned from the recess, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in 15 minutes. His hands trembled as he retook the stand, and I couldn't help but remember how steady they'd been holding that forged paper at Margaret's memorial. Funny how guilt can shake even the steadiest grip. Father Michael, Judge Morrison said, you may proceed with your complete statement. He cleared his throat twice before speaking. I received an envelope. His voice cracked. It contained $2,000 and the addendum. The gallery's whispers rose like wind through dry leaves. You could have heard a pin drop when he continued. Patricia Bennett delivered it personally. She said it was a stipend for handling additional memorial duties. Father Michael's collar seemed to strangle him. I was told the addendum was properly executed and simply needed public presentation for legal record. I felt Father Thomas shift beside me. We both knew what was coming. And you accepted this payment? The judge asked, her tone sharp as winter frost. Yes, Your Honor. Father Michael's shoulders slumped. I convinced myself it was legitimate because of who was asking. But I knew... He stopped, swallowed hard. I knew something wasn't right. The buzz in the courtroom grew louder. Patricia's face had gone from stone to ash, while Robert stared at his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. Their high-priced attorney stood, probably ready to object to something, anything, but then slowly sat back down. Sometimes silence speaks volumes. Judge Morrison's expression could have frozen hell itself. Let the record show Father Michael has admitted to accepting payment for presenting a suspicious document during a memorial service. She turned to the gallery. I've seen enough. My fingers tightened on the trial folder in my lap. The leather felt warm, alive almost. Inside were copies of every document Margaret and I had ever signed together. Mortgage papers, tax returns, garden service receipts. 52 years of shared life reduced to ink and paper. Remember our first lease signing? Margaret had laughed at how long I took reading every line. Thorough as always, my bookkeeper, she'd said, squeezing my hand. The judge's voice snapped me back to the present. This court finds clear evidence of will tampering. The addendum is hereby voided. She looked directly at me. Mr. Bennet retains full control of the estate as originally documented. The relief hit me like a wave. I thought of our rose garden, how Margaret always said good soil and patience would outlast any storm. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, the clerk will prepare findings for referral to appropriate authorities regarding the criminal implications of today's testimony. Patricia's expensive attorney was already packing his briefcase. Robert had somehow managed to find an even more fascinating spot on his shoes. Court is adjourned. The gavel crack echoed like thunder, and suddenly the room erupted. I hadn't noticed the reporters slipping in during recess, but there they were, clustering near the doors with notepads and microphones sprouting like thorns in a neglected garden. Through the gallery's shuffle, I caught a glimpse of one reporter's laptop screen. The words, "Bribed priest admits role in will scandal," blazed across his draft headline in bold letters. For the first time since the memorial, I took a full, deep breath. The air tasted clean like spring morning dew on Margaret's roses. Father Thomas touched my arm gently. "Harold, are you ready to leave?" I nodded, standing slowly. My legs felt steadier than they had in days. Through the courtroom's tall windows, sunshine painted the oak panels gold, the same warm shade as our kitchen on Sunday mornings when Margaret would, "Mr. Bennet," a reporter's voice cut through my memories. "Do you have a statement about today's ruling?" More microphones appeared, more cameras, more questions flying like startled birds. But all I could think about was getting home to straighten Margaret's photos on the mantel. The morning paper hit my driveway with a thud that felt like justice. There it was, right on the front page. Memorial service scheme exposed. Priest admits bribe in widow's will contest. I picked it up, hands steady for the first time in weeks. You know that feeling when truth finally breaks through clouds? That's what reading that article felt like. Every detail laid bare. The forged addendum, Father Michael's $2,000 stipend, Patricia and Robert's elaborate plan. The reporter hadn't missed a beat. By noon, my phone started ringing. First came Carl from the hardware store, offering to change my locks free of charge. "Nobody should have to wonder who's got keys to their own home," he said. I took him up on it. Then Ellen from church called. The parish bulletin had run a special notice about Father Michael's leave of absence pending review. She also mentioned that Patricia and Robert's names had mysteriously vanished from 3 charity board rosters. "Funny how fast people check their donor lists when scandal breaks," I said. Ellen's knowing chuckle told me everything. While Carl worked on the locks, I unpacked the box of new picture frames I'd ordered. Beautiful solid oak, just like the ones Margaret always preferred. "Everything looks steadier in oak," she used to say. Made sense. She'd always been the steady one. I climbed the step stool carefully, Margaret's voice in my head reminding me to test each step first. One by one, I rehung our photos. Our wedding day, that summer in Cape Cod. Christmas 1987, when the whole family still smiled like they meant it. Each frame perfectly level, just the way she taught me. Looking at those captured moments, I remembered how she'd dust each frame every Sunday after church. "Photos collect more than memories," she'd say, wiping glass with soft cloth. "They collect proof that love was here." Carl finished up around 2, handing me 5 new keys. "Tested them all myself, Mr. Bennet. House is yours alone now." I wrote him a check, added a bit extra. Good work deserves fair pay, another of Margaret's rules. The afternoon sun was hitting that perfect angle she loved when I finally headed out to the garden. I'd stopped by Henderson's nursery earlier for those special roses she'd always wanted to try. Margaret's Peace, they were called. Seemed right somehow. The soil felt rich and cool as I dug the first hole. Margaret had spent 30 years teaching me proper rose planting. "Depth matters," she'd say. "Too shallow, they'll never take. Too deep, they'll drown. Everything needs its right place." Each bush went in exactly 18 inches apart, roots spread gentle, like fingers reaching for life. I tamped the soil firm but not tight, added the mix of nutrients she'd sworn by. The plants looked small against the trellis, but Margaret always said roses just need patience. Through the kitchen window, I could see those first few petals catching light, pale pink with hints of cream, her favorite colors. The sight hit me harder than I expected. Funny how the smallest things can suddenly feel so big. The evening. Paper arrived as I was washing garden dirt from my hands. Different paper, same story, new details. Seemed Patricia and Robert had been uninvited from the country club's summer gala. Their church study group had reorganized. Even their regular bridge club had disbanded for scheduling reasons. You see, that's the thing about small towns. They run on reputations. Break trust once, you'll find doors closing faster than autumn leaves falling. Mock someone's grief, try to steal their dignity, and watch your own honor shrivel like frostbit roses. I dried my hands, walked back out to check the new plants one last time. The sunset painted everything soft gold, like Margaret's favorite hour. Touching a tender leaf, I said what she would have said, mock a man's grief and you mock your own honor. A petal landed on my sleeve, delicate as her touch used to be. I let it stay there while the light faded and the garden settled into evening peace.